Welcome to this evening's Berlage Keynote lecture by Kayoko Ota entitled Architectural Inventions, Urban Structuring, which will explore the changing attitudes and values of a younger generation of architects in Japan in relation to the country's current social and environmental conditions. Through a few exemplary works, Kayoko will discuss how these architects are expanding an architectural repertoire through urban restructuring. Kayoko Ota is an architectural curator and editor based in Tokyo. She formerly served as a curator and editor at AMO, the mirrored version of OMA, of course, where she co-edited together with Rem Koolhaas and Hans Ulrich Obrist, Project Japan Metabolism Talks. Given the current situation that we are currently in here in the Netherlands and the situation that is happening in Japan, where there is a moratorium on traveling, we're pleased to have Kayoko here with us, at least on video, and unfortunately not in person. So let's say the screen is Kayoko's now. Thank you.
Good evening. It's my great honor and pleasure to speak to you at the Berlage Center today, but unfortunately only remotely from the other side of the globe due to this pandemic. But first, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Salomon Frausto and the faculty of the Berlage Center for kindly inviting me to the lecture series. It would have been really great to visit the school in the Netherlands, which is my home country, and meet you and conversation with you all in person. I hope I can do this sometime in the near future. Today, I'd like to talk about the fundamental shift occurring in the architect's thinking and behavior in Japan. The country may have staged a series of celebrated architects in the past decades, but I'm assuming that the kind of prolificacy we have seen may slow down, giving way for something quite different from what you used to call great architecture. So now I'm going to share the screen. Okay. You are now looking at one of the new CBDs emerging by government-supported redevelopment in the central Tokyo, which is creating greater differences in scale with the surrounding urban fabric. Since around the time of the bubble economy in the late 1980s to the 1990s, urban planning and development has increasingly been delegated by the government to private developers. And now the market for urban development is largely dominated by a handful of developers. The situation in the post-war period, some 80 years ago, was different. Young architects at the time, like Kiyonori Kikutake, as you're looking at his work back in 1958, asserted their own vision for things to come, addressing the whole society like the members of Metabolism, or as a member of Metabolism. This is another member of Metabolism. This is another member of Metabolism, Kisho Kurokawa, who made a proposal for agriculture city. Although it looks like a visionary project, it was a serious attempt to regenerate his hometown in Aichi, which is in between Tokyo and Osaka, after the whole village was damaged by a major typhoon of 1959. Or Kenzo Tange presented a future plan for Tokyo, or how the city in the imminent crisis of population burst could change and reform itself to the public. It was presented to the public, and it was a comprehensive plan based on a thorough research. Some of the architects did manage to embody their vision or visionary vision like Kikutake or Tange, but their achievements were eventually replaced with generic buildings, which were designed by large corporate firms as products or commodities. These are the result of calculation based on the market formula, having very little to do with the specificity of the context or personal vision. If you look at the Japanese GDP growth rate in history, you can see the period of growth really ended with a bubble burst of economy in the early 1990s. And since then, various measures were taken to bring the country back to the golden age. Typically, construction and especially urban development has been a major subject of this economic operation, which, for example, inflated the scale and height of buildings. For Tokyo, the national and local governments together have been encouraging renewal of several nodes into internationally competitive urban hubs, as marked with purple on this map. But at the same time, the old urban fabric, which is marked in red, which is consistently around this the purple area on the periphery of the urban center. And this old urban fabric is facing an increasing risk of deterioration due to the physical weakness and density of timber structures, mostly built right after the Second World War, and which is now being exacerbated by shrinking and the aging of population. Back in the days, it was for these areas that architects with small practice designed a house as an alternative model for living in a city. They also strive to make it an artistic representation of their intellectual thoughts. And this is a house which was designed by Toyo Ito, who was also very much influenced at the time by Kazuo Shinohara, as much as Sejima and Nishizawa. And such experimental works certainly push the limit of architecture, but whether or not they have much concern with how their work would or should relate with the surrounding condition is a separate issue. Into the 21st century, there was a wake-up call. In the never-ending economic stagnation since the bubble burst, we were forced to face the demographic phenomena and its consequences and change our values. It was useless to think of the future in the way we did at the time of the Expo 70. The population of Tokyo is expected to start shrinking in 2025, and we also see less working population due to the population aging. We are also expecting the increase of old people living alone. And the number of houses being abandoned is increasing. And this will be the game changer for housing design. Now, many architects say that they had to redefine their profession after the great earthquake of Tohoku in 2011. This seemed to be a phenomenon specific to Japan, but as we see the global warming causing unforeseen disasters all over the world, it no longer seems a local issue, nor the population aging or shrinking. Having a mind shaken by the 2011 disaster, the architect's interest, especially in the younger generation, is shifting from creating works as author to engaging with society. Here are some of the renovation works by the younger generation, which are designed as a pilot project or instigator of regenerating the neighborhood. Yoshihiko Oshima, who is the second person on the right, in the left, the second person from the right on the left picture, leading a studio called Blue Studio, became a role model of young architects by bringing many projects of regenerating shrinking neighborhoods to a success. This family restaurant on the right, renovation is a launchpad for reactivating the shrinking shopping street, which the restaurant is facing in an old neighborhood of Tokyo. Or architect Joe Nagasaka, leading the team, the studio called Schemata, believes that the renovation of a moderate scale or small scale, rather than a solid one-off building, is more effective in developing the neighborhood, as it can let the neighbors think that, hey, maybe this kind of renovation is doable for myself too. And this was the case for this small rice shop in an old neighborhood of Tokyo. Meanwhile, in the central part of Tokyo, like this place, which is around the central station, which is a prime CBD, and where even further inflation of space is taking place right now. And so the development is very much in the hands of major developers, general contractors, and corporate design firms, which means that architects with small practice are almost completely excluded from the scene. So now we have a situation that the small design practice is more and more marginalized in the market of urban development, while the profession's concern is leaning towards social challenges and engagement, which is great, but as a result, architectural design is becoming more pedestrian and or ordinary, being mainly concerned with managing solutions in predictable manners. And I think this is a problem as well. What I want to show you today is that new behaviors are emerging among architects, which might be a sign of turning point for the architecture profession altogether. They have high concern for social interaction, while also trying to expand the repertoire of architecture itself in a different way than their older generations did. The new breed treat architecture as a strategic urban intervention, although the result may seem more subtle. Shibuya is one of several urban nodes of Tokyo and is now going under a massive redevelopment to become a business and entertainment hub. The complex project overarches several skyscrapers, a public plaza, pedestrian connectors, and so on, executed by a consortium led by a railway company, which also acts as the developer. These high-rise buildings look quite generic, of course, and the building that I'm going to talk about is no exception, which is this skyscraper called Shibuya Stream. And the architect studio Sierra Kant made a remarkable evolution, however, inside the building. They focused their efforts on the lower portion of the building from the ground level up to the 5th floor, because from the 6th floor up to the top of the building is entirely office floors rented out to Google Japan. And so this lower portion needed to have public passages and retail functions. The architects managed to evolve the functionality of a skyscraper in 2 ways. One is that they enhanced the public use of the privately owned territory with a network of large void penetrating through the lower portion in all directions. This network lets visitors coming from various directions for various purposes mix. This was done at the expense of sacrificing retail rent, of course, but the client took a long-term evaluation of profit return. The second achievement is that they kept the end of all the void channels open. And so they allowed the users to have a direct contact with the air and view outside. Let's take a closer look. The lower portion of the skyscraper works as a connector of diverse urban elements surrounding the building, a major train station, a highway, a very busy urban road, and the canal. And people enter the building and walk through it for various destinations to be mixed in a dynamic urban space inside the skyscraper. What allows for the connections is a network of halls, as drawn in an early sketch by the architect Kazuhiro Kojima, the founding partner of Sierra Khan, who sadly passed away before the building completion. You're now looking at the model of the lower portion of the building with the higher portion lifted up. You see a network of passage is hollow throughout. So here you see the elevated highway, a network of pedestrian deck which runs, which spreads under the highway, and then underneath this pedestrian network is the very busy urban road. And this is the site. Along a very tiny canal, which used to be buried under the ground to make more space for the last Olympic in 1964. And on the other side of this, the site is the major station of Shibuya. This solution was also inevitable due to the congested urban condition around the site, as I just explained. And as the section drawing shows here, the building had to consider connection to elements at various height levels above and under the ground. So you are looking at the building section here next to the Shibuya station. This is the ground level and the canal, which was resuscitated for the development. And this is the very busy urban road. And then there is also a connection from the building to the subway station underneath with this urban connector, which also the architects designed. So this is the outcome. The architects took advantage of the height differences of the surrounding elements on the site, which is at the very bottom of a valley, this geographic condition. This is a model of holes made by the architect. It's a channel of voluminous voids which penetrates through the lower portion of the building. The void with the largest opening here works as the main entry to the building, which has no facade nor doors. An entire void network is open to the outside 24/7, as I mentioned. So this is the big entry to the building, and there's no facade or a door. And this is the large staircase. And they also made a pedestrian road, the promenade along the canal, which were all created because it used to be occupied by older building before. By now, you must be wondering how the small architect studio like Silicon could do this all. They were able to join this project with the condition that they're assisted by a large design firm and work with urban planners and civil engineers outside through the entire process. And one of the breakthroughs achieved by the team was the creation of this big staircase. The big staircases, which is made in a void, where they could get rid of large structural columns. As you can see here, these columns were there, very much there in the model, in the early model of the project. But thanks to the negotiation, a very intense discussion, negotiation with urban planners, they succeeded in getting rid of them so that the void space can really function as a public gathering place. The big staircases were working well as public space, like this one, well, until the break of the pandemic. And this space, and also the space in front, are occasionally used for public events. Also now. Now, ascending the stairway, you land on the main passage on the 3rd level. Oops, yes. So now I'm going to talk about this main passage on the 3rd level. It's a big tunnel penetrating the long side of the building and stretching its arms in all directions on two levels. We are now on the main passage in the void channel. On a sunny day, it's quite bright here, feeling almost in the outside. Wind and rain might blow in too, which is also nice. And escalators fly through large holes punched in the upper floors, like this, which allow both physical and visual interactions of various people: office workers, commuters, shoppers, hotel guests, theater goers, tourists, and people just hanging out, of course. And maybe some of you think that, well, this reminds of a very early project, well, much earlier project by OMA, which was for the Euroville, I think, and also maybe a little bit like the National Library for Paris. But also the architects were very much influenced by Hiroshi Hara, who since the 1960s established the theory of holes or hollowness. But anyways, I think it is, I agree about the resemblance, but I think that it is really about the realization and of the idea. And also as a result of an earnest negotiation and accumulation of many breakthroughs of architectural thinking into the economic reality. Now, some part of the main passage has multiple floors, keeping the old railway track as a memory of the place, which these the metal lines going through the floor of the passage. And this main passage was carefully designed along the track line to create an informal atmosphere of an alley. So this is slightly curved instead of being straightforward, and lined with small restaurants and shops. You see, this is the plan for the main passage, hand-drawn by the architect. The architect scripted details of how shops should be organized along the curved track line. They laid things out in such a way to give a less controlled feel and more sense of intimacy. So they encouraged the restaurants to spill out more and more into the main passage. And of course, someone had to negotiate with the authority to change the regulation. While saving some space in between restaurants. For example, here, you see this little alley, the narrower void channel, which are marked where anyone can hide or rest as if in backstreet. You can also have direct contact with the outside air, the outside here. So these are also the efforts of the architects to undo the sterile universal space in a skyscraper and create more sense of belonging for users. I think that Shibuya Stream has presented an alternative model of skyscraper, addressing the issues of isolation, detachedness from the outdoor air, and consumer-oriented efficiency at the expense of spontaneous interaction or flexibility. Also, for the first time, the project proved that the small design practice was able to design a skyscraper thanks to the courageous attempt by the project's advisors. Now I'm going to talk about the second project. If Sirakant was exceptionally fortunate to be given an opportunity to design a skyscraper, the design office Noise, led by Keisuke Toyoda, was exceptionally courageous to announce a self-invited proposal for an alternative model of skyscraper in the center of Tokyo. You're now looking at the central business district called Narunouchi, right next to the Imperial Palace in the center of Tokyo. And you see the red brick building, which was called, which is an office tower and considered as one of his master work. One of the masterworks of by Kunio Maekawa and built in 1974. And the owner of this building, which is an insurance company, decided to demolish this building and renew it with the design of Renzo Piano just recently. Of course, historians and Maekawa's proteges are now protesting the demolition, while the young architect Toyoda and his team use this polemic as an opportunity to proclaim the idea for renewing the standard of a skyscraper design altogether into something much more socially connected and relevant. You see, remember this red brick office tower, which was not so high, but after the building was built, the regulation or deregulation happened one after the other, and now the maximum height allowance is much higher than this building by Maekawa. And Toyota's idea, the proposal was to envelop the existing building with a very high performance glass tower, which is transparent, like this one, and so that the volume is inflated in all directions, like this drawing shows, on the four sides, but also above the building. So with the inflation of volume, they think they can meet the owner's demand to increase the space necessary, and while allowing to provide a number of common spaces for leisure and exchange, which are exposed to the outside. Also, the proposed programs are more mixed than in regular office towers today, and are organized to make the building more resilient to change according to the social demands, so that it can function as an urban infrastructure. In fact, the point of this project is not so much about preserving an old masterpiece, but in my view, it's really about the architect's gesture. Stepping out of the professional regime or market regime, Toyoda attempted to make a public appeal of an architectural vision, which fosters a new potential for the society at large. Such an action is unprecedented since the metabolism time, but this time not just as a visionary image, but as something realistic and adaptable right away thanks to the architect's thorough research and inventive thinking. Now, I want to talk about the third architect who is addressing the typical condition of living in Tokyo, where more social interaction is needed in the increasingly isolated and shrinking neighborhood. The dilemma is that while having a high risk of damage by natural disasters such as fire, earthquake, flood, or typhoon, these areas are where people still keep traditional ways of living, which are more informal and pleasurable, and also shared memories. Some of these areas look like this, where small houses are arranged along a narrow street. For security reasons, these areas are being the subject of organization encouraged by the local government, and with typically high-rise condos. For the architect Erika Nakagawa, the primary task of an architect was to think of how architecture relates with the surrounding condition, how the building helps the dweller communicate with the outside. She clearly bid farewell to the traditional school of architecture, which makes an independent work based on its own philosophy. The work I'm going to talk about is a tiny apartment named A Neighborhood in a House, with the footprint of 1919 square meters only. The site is in a congested vernacular neighborhood. With such a small area, there is really not much you can do but follow time-tested conventions. With this project, Nakagawa chose to experiment redefining the architectural elements, especially the exterior facade, exterior surface, which is designed to enhance interaction with the outside. The project stands in a typical condition of Tokyo, surrounded with a wide urban road lined with taller buildings and a narrow street lined with old small wooden houses. What the architect did first was to observe and identify the characteristic of the urban condition. Like this photo show, houses in a densely built neighborhood typically have alleys with plants, which work as shared space for indirect communication among the neighbors. The houses have various extrusions and offer mechanical or utility elements attached to the exterior surface. The houses in older neighborhood have various extrusions and offer mechanical or utility elements attached to the exterior surface, such as drainage pipes, gas meter boxes, ventilation duct, and other outdoor equipment. So pipes and mechanical devices are usually considered as eyesore, but Nakagawa chose to appropriate all of these things together to her apartment project as a means of communicating the life inside to the outside. She incorporates pipes, meter boxes, and bay windows into the facade as part of the design. I should note that these are not a stylistic expression like the high-tech architecture in the 1980s, for example. On the contrary, it's a result of redefining the building facade in a larger context of the neighborhood. Today, all types of housing are becoming containers completely separated from the outside, and I see that it's a remedy for recovering ties with the world around the house. As an interface between residents and neighborhood, she also elaborated on the design of the external staircases, which is mandated for small buildings for emergency, but these are rarely used in reality. She wanted these staircases to work as an extension of an alley or a tiny garden, or as a tiny garden shared among the neighborhood. All of the peripheral space in and around the flat of each floor is designed as a medium for interacting with the outside, visually and physically. The landing of the staircases are designed as an extension of each flat, which enables the resident to have a bit more space and air, enjoy views, and personalize the space for utility or comfort. This collage is a sort of prescription by the architect to the dwellers, showing how they can enjoy living in this apartment in every little corner. Today, large cities are increasingly driven by the market economy, which ended up in excluding architects who think and create individually. The three architects that I talked about today are suggesting a new direction for architects by recovering the power to invent and aggressively engage with the social reality of now. I'm hoping that the voices of these people and their contemporaries get together and reach the territories that have become off-limit to innovative architectural thinking. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kayoko, for presenting a number of interesting case studies and new offices to rethink the contemporary condition in Japan. We look forward to picking up the discussion with you at another moment. Thank you and good evening.